there's a time for meeting in terms of a more active meeting, inquiry. And often it requires us to start on the surface level of a pattern that has been identified, a thought, a reaction, allowing yourself to sink into it patiently, curiously, tenderly. So I talk often about these layers, and they're not very high resolution, but sort of purposefully so, because I feel like there's many, many more layers, but to just understand the broad strokes of it gives you enough of a sort of a way into it all. So you start out, the pin on the map, the thought, the story. You start to notice that. You become curious about that, but you sink beneath it into the tone, into the texture, into the emotion of it. And then we, keep going deeper into it, but it's a pulling into it. It's not a push, right? I gotta get through this. It's a softening yourself curiously, each layer that opens up, allowing yourself to be opened by that. Stay in that realm as long as is needed to be stayed. It's like the eyes adjusting to the dark room. What have we got here? What's going on here? What do I find here on this emotional level? Okay, but we don't stop there. We keep going. Okay, what's underneath it? Where is it felt in the physical? Where is it felt in sensation? Okay, darkened room. Don't know what we're meeting here. Let's meet this. Let's find out. And again, traversing even down into the energetics of it all. And eventually we come to rest in the self. And there's one more step that I've seen over the years of working with people that naturally happens, but is also a good place to where you come to that rest. And I think you and I have worked with this before, but as a beautiful, a moment of reminder there, to then go back up to the original thing, because then you start to see if actually it has released or not. If you don't go back up and you just stay in that place of emptiness, empty silence, you could feel like, oh, okay, everything's good again. And it may well be, but we need to be able to see if that's actually true. And so actually allowing yourself to go back up. And sometimes that naturally happens. I've described it as the tide coming in, the waves coming in, and a little bit further out and coming in, a little bit further, a little bit, that sort of sinking into it again and again and again, deeper and deeper each time. So yeah, where you find yourself to be aware, maybe newly aware, maybe it's not newly aware, maybe it's a pattern that's been there a million times before, but where there is suddenly this, oh gosh, there's something here, there's clarity of that. That's where self inquiry, as I'm using that as a very broad container for what we're talking about here, can be employed there, let's say.
For the kind of exploration, I'm using what is this? And then taking my attention into the body.
Yeah.
And what seems to be happening is if I don't know whether it's just quickly or whether there's a skipping, just probably slow.
Yeah.
The
Slow.
thought seems to be going through the emotional realm quite quickly and into the energetic.
Yeah.
So then I was, not every time, but it has been just lately.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anything problem with this, as long as we again just check in with all the realms to see if there is some stickiness, something that's actually, because what you notice is if you start to go into it and it actually has released, has dissolved, has cleared, there won't be the same stickiness, there won't be the same charge there. And so that to me is a good indicator of if the same, memory or the same, whatever it might be, same pattern recognition is there and it has been worked through, it doesn't hold the same charge to it when it's sort of dissolved. It's not to say you won't cycle back, like in that spiral sense, into that in the future. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is in that moment, whether there has been a sufficient meeting of that in this moment. And that to me is always found in if there is still some stickiness and some charge.
That's a good thing to know, to just look for that little
Yeah.
bit of stickiness if there's any.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can feel it in the body. I mean, it's likely that you're going so to the energetic sensations because you've spent all this time hanging out in the mind field, and it's like you understand that, not just understand it, but you've been with that. And also the emotional, you've been hanging out in the emotional field for a long, okay, I understand. You're sort of it. It's like we work through these levels quicker and quicker, where there is insight, as in light, as in awareness of there. That's what I find, at least. I, move through these layers very quickly, sometimes instantaneously now, sometimes not. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. But it's like the more you, I guess the word I want to use here is you've learnt the language of this. So each field has its own language, has its own sort of yeah, language is the best word I could use. It's not language in terms, I'm using language in a very broad sense of the word language. Um, you know, colors have their own language, not just English language and French language. It's, everything has its own language. Animals have their own language. Everything has its own, way it communicates. That's better than saying language, way it communicates. So the emotions have their own way of communicating. Energetics has its own way of communicating, not just verbal. So it's likely that if you've spent time, which I know you have, sort of learning the language of these different levels, you can traverse through it quicker, but it's only you that will be able to discern that, and slowing down is the only way you'll be able to discern that.
Yeah,
Whether
and
you're
which
actually moving through it or you're just bypassing it.
yeah, there's definitely some of that because I get a sense of that, and also I think the body, I think, is very good at showing. So
Yes.
like, yeah, if there's a little bit of delusion about having felt something, like, for instance, I can feel sensations in the jaw of perhaps a little holding.
Yeah.
And so there's an indicator, I would say, right? That so
Yeah.
there's
Exactly.
there's the body showing where there's
Yeah.
something that, hello, hello.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Here's another take on all of this, and it's come up a number of times. I'm trying to remember whether it's come up in Satsang or whether it's just come up in emails privately. Anyway, it's come up a number of times this week. I can't recall whether it's in Satsangs only or emails only or a bit of both, but it's come up, this thing of playfulness.
Mm.
And so there's two things that I feel stand us in really good stead with all of this. One is the slowing down, and two is the playfulness, curiosity, another word for curiosity, because it can get all very serious in terms of, have I worked through this? Have I missed something? Oh dear, I'm doing it wrong. All of that kind of thing. You get very up in your head about it. One gets very up in their head about it. And so I think when it comes to this is to trust that whatever needs to be met will be met, and to not concern ourselves too much with sort of making the perfection of it all, like that thing of like, if I cleaned the floor perfectly, if I left a speck of dust, And it's like allow yourself a little bit more elbow room to be playful and curious about all of this rather than perfect about all of this.
Mhm.
I think is probably the way I would encourage approaching,
Mhm.
um, to be helpful, to be more helpful is that curiosity.